Okay, here we go. We're on to number 13
Mm-hmm.
in the series of Alien Contacts and Bob's Life. And it's just turned January 10th, 2019.
Yeah. As things developed, there was evidently quite a struggle within what was considered that time to be, and we're talking what was like 2004, between the late 90s and 2004. Quite a struggle within the reptilian empire to overthrow the linkages to the fallen ones, as they referred to them, whom they actually ended up killing, in order to free themselves up.
You want to extrapolate a bit on that?
Yeah.
You know, who the fallen ones are.
Yeah, I will.
The different, types of reptilians, the Draco and all that business.
There are many different factions of reptilians and many different species or cultures, races, however you want to call it. Some are the Anunnaki, who helped to terraform this world for their purposes, and who helped to make man in an image they wanted to have work the minds for them.
At this point in time, they're distant cousins, though.
Yeah.
They're the Anunnaki are actually more human-like, at least in appearance.
Well, yeah.
And the reptilians, for a very long time, as we understand it, had a falling out with the Anunnaki.
Yeah.
But if I remember correctly, there's 3 or 4 basic within the reptilian empire, different reptilian groups, kind of like the Indian caste system. You got the Draco are the highest, right?
Yeah.
And then what's under them? And then you have a worker class that is real good with building things and making things. And do you remember?
Well, they're good soldiers.
Do you remember the four? It's funny.
Well, the fourth would have been the ones they were killing off. The main fallen Draco ones. Nowadays we say fallen angels, but actually the war in heaven was a war in the heavens, a war between different star systems, which is still going on to some degree even now. We're just lucky we humans haven't been too terribly aware of it. We're fortunate we haven't had to be.
For those that don't know, the Draco were the ones that had. They're super tall. They have wings.
Yeah.
They can actually fly for short periods of time.
Yeah.
They are like dark angels.
Well, those are the higher Dracos that date back to the fallen ones.
Right.
That other Dracos, younger Dracos, actually were killing off to break the link with them.
Right.
And
because they were those old, fallen Dracos, they had no intent on changing and were fighting tooth and nail.
Yeah.
And the bulk of the reptilian empire that wanted to change around, because basically, they saw the writing on the wall, and heaven even, said to them, and Archangel Michael and everyone else involved, as well as there was a lot of other races involved, because the reptilians had run amok throughout.
yeah. They were the bullies on the block.
Yeah, beyond somewhat beyond this galaxy, and made a lot of enemies, and had run roughshod over a lot of races. They were very much kind of like raping and pillaging and taking over planets and stuff that weren't theirs. And so they built up a lot of animosity, to say the least. So when heaven took a firm stand, there was a lot of other groups that would not have a chance to stand up against the reptilians on their own, because their technology wasn't good enough. Joined the fray. But one of the main people who joined the fray that the reptilians could not fuck with is the Andromedans.
Hmm. And the Andromedans actually kicked them out. They had gone into the Andromedan galaxy. This goes into the future tense, and I don't want to get into this right now, but in the future, way in the future, there was a war of reptilians trying to invade the Andromedan galaxy from this galaxy, and the Andromedans kicked their butts, kicked them out with great losses on both sides. The Andromedans are now trying to change that before it can happen. We get into that in a later time, not now.
Well,
no,
you don't
not
have
now.
to deal with that because we have a whole
I know.
separate section called the Andromedans.
I
We're that's covered. So
Yeah. So the Andromedan contacts that we're doing that are being recorded, you can find out more about that topic then. We met a number of different reptilian leaders. One by the name of Zargesh, another later on by the name of Gordek. These are what they call lead senators, which we would call president. They have shifted over to become a very militaristic republic. An alliance is what they call themselves now, instead of an empire.
Yeah.
They have made progress. They have more to make. Later on, another one by the name of, well, his first part of his reptilian name is Gare. He told me I could call him Gary. Make it easier in English, And I originally met him when I was about 4 or 5 years old. Have to kind of step back briefly in time about this.
By the way, the reptilians have extremely long lives.
Yeah.
Upwards of between 50 and 70,000 years
Yeah.
of our time is par for the course.
This situation happened where instead of being picked up by the Greys, I was ending up on a well, I guess we'd say a space station now, but it was large as a city in space near the Pleiades. To me, as a little boy, on approach to it, it looked like if you could take New York and put a ceiling on it. Got a ground, got a ceiling, and all the buildings and stuff in between, the lights and everything at nighttime, I used to think of it as a city in the night sky. And this, by our standards, he would have been in his probably late 30s, early 40s, if we were to equate the way he looked to our aging process. His name was Gary. Well, for me, I was a little kid, he was quite tall. He was shape-shifted human. I don't mean telepathically, and some people will say that, oh, the reptilians can't shape-shift physically, it's only telepathic. I have to say I firmly disagree, and my own personal experience has shown they are quite capable of shape-shifting physically as well as telepathically if that's the way they choose to do it. Extremely psychic. Excuse me. He had dark, almost black hair, full head of almost curly hair at that time, and I remember he wore like tan khaki pants and a bomber jacket. I would have expected somebody to wear a space suit or something. And he would take me by the hand and guide me around and let me see different things and explain different technologies to me, which as a little kid, some of it I understood, a lot of it I didn't. He explained that the bomber jacket was one of his favorite possessions. It was a gift from a friend here on Earth, apparently for him having flown some missions during World War II. Gary.
He had a lot of secret,
Oh boy, did he.
missions going on. He was in their elite class,
Mm-hmm.
what they used to call the black.
Well,
Okay.
okay.
Can I say that he really and truly liked and appreciated humans.
Yeah.
And even before the reptilians, I think it's safe to say now, even before they decided to embrace or even think about embracing, turning over a new leaf, for God knows how many thousands of years,
Yeah.
he was a visionary and
Mhm.
a real good being, and was secretly thinking ahead and making steps toward that happening and plans for that happening. And if any of them ever had found out, any of his peers had found out what he really felt in his heart, this vision for them,
Yeah, he wouldn't have been around.
he would have been gotten rid of, lickety split. So he was truly a really, really good guy. And during the time that we knew him and the reptilians were here, for roughly 15 years,
Yeah.
he ended up in the last few years he became their lead senator, which is like our president.
Yeah.
So anyway.
He started out as a captain, then became an admiral, then became a lead senator. I'm trying to think how I want to say this. His mother was a senator, and she had to invite him into a certain order, a certain section of their military elite, put it that way. Very militaristic society, and still are. What we call grunts, soldiers on the ground types, they go through boot camp in the reptilian culture. By the time they get out of boot camp, they are not only qualified as terrific soldiers, they're also qualified as what we would call a general practitioner doctor.
They learn everything.
Yeah, they don't have to call for a medic. Everyone's a medic. After the boot camp, they can do one of two things. They can further their military career and even specialize in any number of areas. Or they can drop out of the military and become service workers and paper pushers, so to speak, as we would call them in our society.
As their kids, because their lives are so extremely long, their schooling goes on for
quite a while,
few thousand years.
Yeah. When they're of equivalent of 14 years old in our standards, they are considered adult. And if they haven't already been in what we would call military academy type schools, then they do go into one then. Many cases they're raised in military schools from early childhood on up. Gary, excuse me, Gary had specialized in a number of different fields. One, what we would call espionage, spy work. Another, He was also specialized in psychotherapy as a psychotherapist as well as a psychologist, and a lot of training in their psychor, psychic core, psychor, as a specialist in applied psychic capabilities or psychic phenomena. Also a specialist in applied religions, which kind of surprised me when he told me that. As a little kid when I met him, and I'm still not quite sure what all happened, we were on this huge space station, city-sized space station, and I know at one point I told him, I said, you know, I think I was involved in a big war, and somehow I came to Earth, and I don't understand any of this, but I think I didn't really get away from that war. And he told me at the time, he said, don't worry about it, Bob. When the time comes, you will understand it and you'll know what to do. And I remember we were sitting on like a bench when he said that, like a plastic-like bench or something. At one point he showed me a landing and takeoff bay in this huge city-type space station. It was cold. God, it was so cold. There was like a big catwalk. We were like 2 or 3 stories up, so to speak. Big catwalk, floor way beneath us with different strange-looking things as a little kid, you know, strange-looking things that were, some of them were starting to lift in the air, some of them were just resting on the ground or the floor. And there were like painted out areas lined out where these different things were supposed to be. There were spacecraft, small ones, and anti-gravity. On the opposite side from me there was this huge opening. You could see the stars. And there was a rush of air constantly, and I remember it being bitter cold. And Gary told me he used to fly things, and I said, you mean airplanes? He said, yes, I did, but he said, I also flew other things. And I said, what do you mean? And he pointed at one of the ships, one of the small craft, small, I mean, you could fit a couple of people in it. And he said, oh, I used to fly things like that. At one point he picked me up on his shoulders and carried me around and just showed me different things in this city, Space City. At one instance I was taken to the doctor's office, is what he called it. I don't remember a thing about it at all. It was a totally dark room, a slick feeling table that I was put on, and I lost consciousness, and I don't remember anything to this day about it. I never felt like anyone there was going to hurt me. At one point I even saw a Christmas tree that was just hovering in the air by itself. And I asked him, I said, oh, do they believe in Jesus here? Do they, you know, I remember I was like a 4-year-old and 5-year-old kid. I said, do they have Christmas here? And Gary said, some do. They don't really celebrate Christmas, but they honor the idea of it. And he said, it's not like we give gifts or anything. This is just decoration to honor the concept for those on board who do believe in the idea of Christmas. And I said, well, so do you get Santa Claus? And he said, no, I'm afraid we don't. A 4-year-old kid, remember? But years later, coming up to present time, I'm trying to think how I want to put this. Gary took quite an interest in me. he told me it would be many, many, many years later that I would meet him again. He was right. I think I was about 61 or so when I met him again. Maybe 62. And he knows who I've been in past lives. At least, well, one of them anyway. He says, and I do believe what he says, that he was Luke, the great physician, at the time of Jesus. He